Hey everybody, how you doing? All right, well, I've been really looking forward to this next one here. Horizon Zero Dawn out this February on PS4, and it's looking awesome, obviously, as you guys saw at the showcase yesterday. So it is my distinct pleasure to welcome John Gonzalez and Herman Hulst from Guerrilla Games. Please give them a warm welcome.
Hey guys.
Great to see you, Herman.
Good morning, Sid.
John, thank you for joining us. This is exciting. I want to kick things off, though, with a little refresher, if you don't mind. Let's check out that trailer we saw at PlayStation Showcase yesterday here at PlayStation Experience.
Let me tell you what's out there. Vast reaches of wilderness, untamed. A rugged domain, majestic, but lethal. It belongs to them, the machines. The steel beasts who rule these lands and guard the secrets buried beneath its crumbling ruins. If you hunt these wilds, no matter how skilled you are, no matter how clever, you will become the hunted. Can you brave that challenge? Can you pass that test? If you want to survive, you have to make the kill. Only then can you bring to light the deep secrets of the Earth.
Thank you, guys.
Very, very, very nice. So it's a pleasure to have both of you gentlemen here. John, you are the narrative director for Horizon Zero Dawn. I know you're obviously tied up in this game, I think, at a very, very deep level here. So I'm kind of curious, just broadly speaking, how did this game come about? This question is also for you, Herman.
Well, we reached out after a decade working on the Killzone series in 2010 to the entire studio, where we asked to generate some ideas, right? Some 40, 50 were pitched to the management team. We narrowed it down to two. One of these concepts made a lot of sense for us to make. It was a very prudent choice. And the other one was Horizon Zero Dawn. Well, Horizon Zero Dawn seemed like a very risky choice because it's a new IP, and the new IP is incredibly difficult to make. It was an open world game that Guerrilla had no experience with. It was an action RPG that was a new genre to the studio, and it has an art style that couldn't be more different from the gritty beauty that is Killzone. So I tried really hard to not start with the project Horizon Zero Dawn, and I failed because we couldn't help ourselves but engage on this project. That's kind of how it came about. It just had too much appeal, and there's too much love in the team, in the studio, to bring this to life.
What was it about sort of the core concept that was so fascinating to you guys at Guerrilla?
So it is about 1,000 years into the future, and the world as we know it here in Anaheim no longer exists, right? It's gone. But it's not an apocalyptic setting. It's a lush, beautiful, majestic setting. It's kind of, in that sense, a BBC Nature documentary. And humankind no longer is the dominant species. The machines now, they roam this world. They are the dominant species. So that makes it super compelling for us to have that kind of juxtaposition between those mechanical beasts and that lush natural setting.
So you have these sort of disparate elements. You've got these mechanical beasts, as you mentioned. You have this sort of lush world that's been sort of reclaimed by nature. I think my question was, like, how did you make all this sort of fit together into a cohesive whole?
Well, that question was exactly what drew me to the project, because around 3 years ago, when Guerrilla approached me and they showed me this concept, when I saw images like this, it posed a really huge mystery. how do you start off with the world that we live in now and end up after 1,000 years or so with a world like this? And I guess you could argue that maybe it doesn't matter. I mean, robot dinosaurs are cool, right? So no explanation needed, sign me up. But I think the ambition of the studio was to do more than just have a really great high concept. It was to create a compelling world, not just one of sprawling breadth, but also one of depth of detail and history. So the way that we did that was to start off with something that's a world more or less like ours, but then cast our minds forward 1,000 years to know what kind of cataclysm it is that befalls this world, to layer another, centuries, 1,000 years of history on top of that, until at the end of this, what we have is a world that's full of all these tantalizing ancient mysteries that you want to solve, but it's also the foundation for something completely new that the tribes of the world have created. So we approached the idea of this world with this odd combination of elements, taking it really, really seriously, delving deep in order to understand how it is you end up having a world with these mechanical beasts, with these tribes that are living alongside them. We took it, really in depth.
I mean, this is an open world game. This is a big game. How did Guerrilla have to adapt as a studio to sort of accommodate making something with this kind of scope?
Well, so that moment back in 2011 when we committed to making this, doing this project, that was a major uh-oh moment, right? On so many levels. For one, organizationally, new genre. We needed to bring in new talent, such as John, obviously experience on the Fallout series and on Shadow of Mordor. So that was some expertise that we just needed to bring in. Then yesterday we talked about the Decima engine. There was a lot of technology that we needed to develop. We needed to develop a streaming engine in order to be able to have this very rich open world. We needed to develop content creation tools, for instance. So a lot of work needed to happen on the tech side. But also on the art side. I mean, this world is filled with tribes. From the ground up, creating a new IP is a very big undertaking, really. So we fleshed it out, and every big questions, these tribes, they're dealing with the threat of these machines in a very different way. Some of them go hunt, others maybe try to protect themselves in fortified areas. So all of that needed to be fleshed out. On the design side, it's great, right? The concept of robot hunting, but what does that actually mean in a minute-to-minute game loop? So we started defining that in gameplay terms. So we came up with this design concept of prepare, engage, and withdraw, and detailed that out. So it's on so many levels, that was a complete overhaul of everything we had done on the Killzone series.
It's fascinating stuff there. So let's use Aloy's tribe. They're called the Nora as an example.
That's right, yeah.
So how did you kind of approach building the lore and how they sort of fit into the...
Yeah, I brought some images from the Nora tribe to kind of talk about what Herman was just describing, how that was applied. So here we can see some concept art from pre-production about this tribe. So one of the things that we knew about the Nora tribe was that they were a kind of rugged band of machine hunters that lived in this very mountainous environment. And so we started taking a look at what would be the implications of that for the culture they would have. One thing that we knew about them was that their religion placed motherhood and the nurturing of children at the highest possible level of significance. We knew that. We knew, of course, the world that they were living in. So we started trying to figure out how do those things combine to create something really distinctive for you to experience as a player. So one thing we've got here that you'll see is in terms of their architecture, they make use of all of the wood that's readily available to them in this environment. But then what they also do is that they use this rugged environment to protect them. They actually place their villages in locations where a lot of the routes of approach are actually covered by mountains, so that these big machines can't just come along and trample everything that they build. But then you also see that the machine hunting plays out in some of the ornamental elements. If you look at the peaks of the roof, you'll actually see machine parts that are there as trophies, kind of reflecting their hunting culture. And then you also see, as you just walk around these villages, you'll see adults training children, again, taking a very active role in nurturing or educating the young in all of the skills that they're going to need to survive. So this is where we have this training dummy here and things like that. And so we kept on then imagining further about what are the dangers that they experience. We were thinking about how they would build these massive, heavily reinforced gates to protect the domains that they live in, that they would be building all of these watchtowers so that they could see dangerous robots that were migrating by. They would have forewarning, know that they would be able to do that. You can also see on the banners and on these glyphs that are on the rocks some of these visual elements that ended up being used throughout the tribe. These kind of round glyphs that have kind of a vaguely Celtic sort of look. The roundness of that isn't random. Again, we were talking about the supreme value that this tribe puts on motherhood, on giving birth, on raising children. The roundness of these shapes actually kind of reflects or echoes the importance that that has for their culture.
Interesting.
And then here we have a couple of examples of things that you'll find in settlements. One of them is essentially a cart, but you actually can see that there's a combination of machine parts and the wood that they have that they build things out of, and then also machine parts that they're using to build a training dummy that they can use for marksmanship practice. So that kind of depth of imagination then went straight into imagining the characters. Here what we've got is one of the high matriarchs, a member of the Council of Wise Women that leads the tribe. And especially when you see this translated into a 3D model, you can see a lot of the details that we were just talking about. If you focus in on this headdress, you'll see the carved wooden elements, and you'll also see on her shoulders the fur from the animals that they can hunt in that area, thinking about their material culture. But there's also something completely new. This headdress has all of this very complex weaving of translucent, it almost looks like fiber optic cable, and is braided with all of this blue cabling. These are elements that are taken straight out of the machines and then are crafted into something decorative. The same approach with looking at a war chief from the tribe. This combination of machine parts, you can see that she has these sort of bracers on her forearms. If she comes to close blows with a machine, affords a little bit of protection. And then again, realized as a 3D model, really in all of that detail. So all of these elements were then used to create the look of all of the members of this tribe. So you have the same combination of materials, but also, and it really yields a lot of variety in what people look like, but it also leads to something that has a kind of thematic coherence. And then when you see it in the game, when you're actually looking at the architecture, it's something that you're interacting with, as part of your quest. It feels, I think, the world feels more real. Also at the level of just when you're going and you're talking to NPCs, you're seeing how all of this is realized, there, and all of these personalities that you're getting to know over the course of Aloy's journey.
Absolutely fascinating here. I mean, I think the attention to detail is stunning. One of the things I love so much about Horizon Zero Dawn is I think it's one of the truly unique universes that have been created in gaming in some time. I mean, we've seen Space Marines, we've seen all these different kinds of things, and there's lots of great fresh takes on this. But this is something truly different. I've never seen anything quite like it. So that's one of the things that has me personally so excited about the game. But I do want to touch on something that we've been kind of hinting at here is the machines. I think it's a topic that continues to captivate people. So kind of curious what more you can tell us about kind of how you came up with these creations.
Well, I think the ambition of the studio was to create a kind of dynamic robot ecology that you would encounter as you're journeying around the world. And here in this image, you can see a couple of the main stars of the show. You can see the Thunderjaw, which is sort of like a robotic Tyrannosaurus Rex, and then also the tall neck, which is a little reminiscent of a giraffe. But I think as the best lens for looking at the approach of the studio to creating this is actually to look at the humblest of the machines, which would be the Shell Walker. This is a machine that shows up in the machines trailer that we were just looking at. It's kind of crab-like. These things move around the world in convoys, carrying valuable resources in these containers on their backs. So that, of course, is a mystery. Like, what exactly is it that they're doing, and where are they headed? But how does this concept begin? Well, it starts off also very humbly, right? It starts off with some concept art and with this kind of original kind of idea. And then I think that you've often talked about how Guerrilla has a particular philosophy with sort of taking that forward.
And our design philosophy has actually remained fairly consistent throughout our work over the last, I would say, decade and a half. We also had that in the Killzone series. What we make in our games typically should look as if it can be built in reality. So on our concept art, we don't just have painters there, but there are people with industrial design background. We employ engineers that really dissect every part of it, and that makes them more believable. It's very important that all of these designs are grounded in reality. We're making a science fiction game, not a fantasy game. It's a very important notion for Horizon Zero Dawn.
Yeah, that is a great distinction there. I mean, there is a big difference. It's science fiction really is based on sort of speculative, things that could actually be, well, what would happen if, whereas fantasy has, sort of more, whimsical in a way. That's interesting to hear you mention that.
The question was asked about fantastical elements, but John wouldn't have it. Not his thing.
Science fiction.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. That's my personal preference.
Hard sci-fi.
That's right. So I think that kind of brings us to the star of the show. That's Aloy. So how did she come about? Was she envisioned after you guys laid the groundwork for this universe, or was she up front, or how did she come into the picture?
So let's get that out of the way. Aloy was part of the concept from day one. She was part of the original pitch. She is really fundamental to this game.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, I think that Aloy is someone who actually she sort of showed up, I think you've often said, in concept art, right? She was sort of like there already as somebody who was in the world.
Interesting.
She just appeared somehow. It's really unnatural for us to envision the game without her, and it's also for us the ideal vessel to explore this game. We have this mysterious world. We have this world that's not really close to what you would see in many other games. So we wanted a character that is young, maybe curious, that's not kind of a hulking creature, but is a little bit more swift. So you have that nice juxtapose between her and the machines. We have a lot of kind of mystical and mythical elements in the game, and she's got that really down-to-earth sense of humor, of wit, and I think that makes her super appealing. I'm in love with Aloy.
Yeah, so I think I remember when I first came on the project, there was this one image in particular that really struck me, where I think this is sort of where she had shown up in the game. There was this young woman, and she was looking out across this valley. This is this particular, I think, jaw-dropping image. And then the question just became, well, then, who exactly is she? Is she a thinker? Is she a dreamer? Or is she a rebel? What is her attitude? Is she a daredevil? And all of these sorts of personalities were explored, both in art and also on the story side. And then what we ended up realizing was that to understand who she was, we really had to put her in the context of the world around her. So with the Nora tribe, earlier we were talking about how they place this supreme value on motherhood. So this question came up, what if Aloy had no idea where she came from? What if she had this personal mystery that she really was driven to solve? And then at the same time, also the idea that they cast people out. So what if Aloy had been cast out of this tribe, but as an infant? How would that even be something that the tribe would do? Again, deepening that mystery. So it allowed us to start having some insight into her psychology, who she was as a character. And I think that what ended up being really exciting about that was that, yes, she's a badass. She's a lot of fun to play. But that's because she's been hardened by living out in the wilds in this really difficult environment. And she's not just a badass to be a badass. She has a purpose. She's out seeking the answers to this bigger mystery in order to understand herself as well as to understand the world. And I thought that ended up making her especially compelling. It sort of put her in this world in a really unique place for you to then inhabit as a player, where you had both this mixture of personal and world mysteries to pursue.
That's fascinating stuff. I mean, she's on this sort of personal quest. We don't know a lot yet. She's on a personal quest of sorts. But, you know, I have to ask, I mean, what are some of the things that she uncovers as she goes through the game?
Well, that's kind of spoiler territory, right? We're not going to go into too much detail there. But and mystery is such a big part of this game. That whole process of you playing as Aloy, unraveling the great mysteries of her personal. She was born an outcast, so to find out how exactly that came about, as well as sort of the world mysteries of why are these machines populating this universe. All these questions are key to the storyline. And I can promise you that the kind of abstract subtitle that we have, Zero Dawn, that's going to make a lot of sense to you once you complete the game entirely.
I've been wondering about that.
That is a hard promise.
Yeah.
So you finished the game, Sid.
All right, I will do that. You can count on me. Okay, so we did put the call out for some questions a little earlier on Twitter. So I did want to throw a few of these at you guys while I had the chance here.
Cool.
So here's sort of a broad one that I think a lot of people are kind of wondering. What inspired the sort of concept of these mechanized dinosaurs, if you will, for this kind of post-apocalyptic future that you guys...
You were part there from the start.
So yeah, just like Aloy, in the very first pitch, we had 3 pillars: gorgeous nature, Aloy as a lead character, and these machines, right? But there was a lot of question about exactly, you know, are they animal-based or not animal-based? Well, maybe you can speak to that, John, because you were such an integral person in this discussion.
Well, I don't want to give away too much about exactly why the machines look like they do, although that is something you'll have insight to by the time that you finish the game. But one of the things that I thought was really compelling about these robot dinosaurs was that, to me, it was taking an open world and really upping the ante. It was really upping the scale. Usually in an open world that you play in, everything's sort of at human scale. But then all of a sudden, you have this David and Goliath kind of dynamic where you're really not the biggest fish in the sea, so to speak, right? There are way more dangerous things out there than even the other human beings. So I thought it was a really interesting innovation in open world to go that direction.
Kind of a way to up the danger, too.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the threat level here is just really beyond what you run across in a lot of games.
I mean, I was joking with you backstage, but in all seriousness, machines, if you had robots, that's pretty dangerous. If you had dinosaurs roaming around, that's also pretty dangerous. If you put them together, well,
That's right, yeah.
that's a whole other can of worms there. So I think this one's an interesting one. You guys have obviously been working on this game for quite a while. Guerrilla's been invested in this game for some time. We had a question here from somebody on Twitter. You know, when it comes to all this lore and world building that you guys have been putting into this, do you think this could be applied to other mediums someday? Maybe film, comics, TV? What's your take on that as it applies to Horizon?
So we're building this world from the ground up, and I believe the universe that we're creating really screams for further exploration, and there's a lot in it. I mean, it's a very detailed world, but as far as, you know, making films out of it or comic books or novels, we are really focused right now. We're going to try and final over the next few weeks, so we have a laser focus on obviously the game to get it out by February 28th. But yeah, I think it really wants to be explored further. Not sure if you want to add to that, John.
I think you said it. I mean, I think we realized that there were really no limits to where our imagination wanted to go with this world. But that said, we absolutely have to stay focused, like Herman is saying, on making sure that what we're delivering to folks on February 28th is compelling. So that's the only thing that we're targeting right now.
That's great. Appreciate that, guys. And now, Herman, I do know that you have a flight to catch. I appreciate you so much for coming by here with us. I also heard it might be the Batmobile. I'm not entirely clear. So thank you so much for joining us. And we're going to continue on with the panel here with John. Thank you, Herman. Thank you for joining us. Thanks a bunch.
Thanks, guys. Have a great PSX.
Okay. Very interesting discussion here. So I think this is a great question. I hope this doesn't veer. I know your specialty, John, is more on the narrative side of things. I hope this doesn't get too close to sort of gameplay mechanics, but I think we can manage it. This question from Twitter was, every role-playing game, every RPG has sort of a dungeon, kind of element to it. Are there dungeons in Horizon Zero Dawn? I thought that was an interesting question.
Yeah, it is interesting. again, I don't want to give too much away, but what I will say is that like I was talking about earlier, the breadth of the world is matched also by the depth of the history that we imagined for it. And there are buried secrets out there. And then as you are playing Aloy and as you're involved in this quest, you are definitely going to be bringing those buried secrets to light. So that's all I'll say at the moment, but there are a lot of secrets out there for you to explore.
I must confess, I mean, I've been following this game closely since it's announced. You guys have done a nice job at sort of tantalizing people, I think, about that there's these layers to the game's mythology. I still can't put my I usually have theories by this point. I'm not sure I have a lot of theories yet about where this game is going in the long run. I mean, clearly there's secrets and mysteries and things like that, but kudos to you. You guys have done a great job building mystique here, and I'm dying to see where it pays off in the game.
Well, thanks. I appreciate you saying that. We have really tried to be very careful about what we're showing, and with one of the trailers that we had around E3, I know that I had a couple of people who were like, "You're giving away too much," but I was like, "No. That is still not really giving away anything." I mean, even that final image that you have in that trailer, and there's a one that's similar at the end of the Machines trailer, where you're seeing some kind of location. It's either human-made or it's machine-made. It's very technological. In the E3 trailer, it's where Aloy is sort of standing before this door that's opening.
Right.
There's obviously some kind of secret on the other side of that, but what is that? I've been really happy to see that the fan speculation, some of which has been very clever, has not yet hit in the direction that we went. I think that people are going to be really excited to find out the truth.
I wish I could just peer into your brain right now. It's driving me crazy. But I guess I'll have to wait till February.
It's a very jet-lagged brain at this point anyway, so probably best to stay out.
Okay, here's a fun question on the topic of the machines. Yep. Clearly an object of fascination for many. If every animal in the game is a machine, I guess I should point out there are some surviving, organic life as well. But if the animals in the games are machine, are they all vegan? Does that count? I mean, is that some loophole there?
Yeah, well, I think that they are. No, I think that there's obviously. Well, the interesting thing is the machines themselves. They do not appear to have predator-prey relationships. Really.
Interesting.
But we did see a glimpse in the trailer
Yes.
of some conflict between the machines.
Yes.
So there's something else that's taking place there. Another one of these mysteries that I'll just sort of hint at and not say anything else about. But the other animals themselves, there's an ecosystem out there as well in the wild. It's not just mechanical beasts, but it's also flesh and blood beasts as well.
John, you're just full of riddles and mysteries today, but I love it. I love it. Now, here's kind of a more profound question for you. We had a lot of folks sending in questions from Twitter. What has been your favorite part about developing Horizon Zero Dawn so far?
Well, yeah, I mean, do you have an hour? I think if I were to try to narrow it down to maybe just a couple of things, I would say that it was getting to know Aloy. There was a lot of work that went into that. I think we saw a glimpse of that when we were looking at some of the concept work. Finding her personality, finding exactly this combination of elements that I think is really compelling. One of them having to be with how tough she is and how capable she is and how smart she is. But then also that there is an aspect of her that is wounded. There is something that's missing that she needs to go and find. That to me made her compelling and relatable, somebody that I really felt like I was getting behind. And as we've been having people play the game, they seem to be really reacting to that and really feeling compelled by that. So I think I think it's working. And then another thing was just the overall story design. We had so much to explore, so much to understand about what had happened in the past. But backstory is just backstory. It's really how are you going to experience that moment to moment in the quests. And when we saw that arrangement of that story in the quests was something that was posing these mysteries, was building to this moment of revelation that actually was just a new vantage point onto an even deeper mystery. that was something that was really building and built to a big climax, something that was both personal for Aloy, but something that was as epic as you can imagine in terms of laying bare what's referred to in the trailer as the deep secrets of the Earth. That was incredibly exciting. I mean, that's a really hard thing to pull off. I think that's working, and so that was kind of electric when we felt like, we've actually tapped into something here, something that feels really special.
Special indeed. Now, conversely, what would you say has been the most challenging part of developing Horizon Zero Dawn?
Well, I think Herman also touched on this a little bit earlier, where he was talking about the kind of studio-wide commitment to changing its approach. I mean, they took a big gamble. This was a really bold move for the studio. And so there's been a lot of learning that we've been doing together as we've been making the game. But other than that, I mean, I don't know that there's any one thing in particular that shows off as a challenge. I mean, game development in general is really hard, and open world game development, I think, is game development on hard mode. So many challenges, but no one in particular stands out as the nemesis.
Now, is there a detail about the game that you're particularly proud of, like from a narrative perspective?
Well, I think it's things that we've already touched on here. I mean, talking about Aloy's character and how you'll experience that as you're playing through the game, the story itself, and then also the tribal cultures. We really only took a look at the Nora. There are other tribes that are also out there, so there's a nice level of variety. You'll actually be adventuring in the territories of some of those tribes. Others, you're just going to be meeting people who have kind of ventured into this part of the world and getting hints about what their cultures are like. So I think just that combination of elements.
I think this is interesting too. We touched on this a little bit before, but you've been with Guerrilla for maybe, I think, about 2 years now.
3 years now.
3 years. Okay, great. So in your time with Guerrilla and working on Horizon Zero Dawn, which it's no secret, it's a bit of a departure for the studio. Done a lot of great shooter work with Killzone and some other things like that. This is a big open world. It's an RPG, has a lot of strong RPG elements and a strong narrative. How have you seen Guerrilla sort of evolve as a content creator in your time here?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think I was one of the people who was brought on who had more open world experience. And so but it wasn't like, we stood around teaching classes or something like that. This was already a world-class development studio. So the level of expertise that I encountered really from day one was, pretty staggering. And so I think it was just a matter of working shoulder to shoulder on how is it that we're going to realize this kind of open world. What are some of the big principles of what makes for a satisfying open world in terms of density of content, variety of content and activities, all of those things. But the people who had been working on the more linear first-person shooters at Guerrilla, they were all huge fans of open-world games and RPGs. So there was already a lot of fluency, I think you could say, with that. So I think that probably the biggest growth was at the foundation of the technical work that was being done, because it's not just the rendering engine, but it's also all of those content creation tools. And we were building those while we're also building the content. So there is a little bit of that feeling of I think the saying is like assembling the cathedral in the middle of a hurricane or something like that. You have a little bit of that, but you just keep iterating and marching towards the conclusion, to set the goal and you march towards it.
Now, that's a really interesting topic there, and you have a lot of experience in open world. You've worked on a number of great open world games. I'm curious from your perspective, given your experience there, open world is a popular genre. It's tackled in different ways. What do you think the secret to a great open world game is, at least from a narrative perspective?
I don't think that there's any one secret. I think that an open world game gives you the broadest possible canvas for whatever kind of experience you're going to create for the player. Some of the principles that obviously are really important, I touched on these really briefly, is you have to have a certain density of content and a variety. You want to have that experience when you're going out in the world. You have one purpose in mind, but you see something over there, just over on the other side of the valley that's that grabs your curiosity. You have to go and check out that new point of interest. Or there are these different types of activities that you can take a break from the main quest or a side quest, and you can go and do that. So I think that that's probably the closest thing to kind of general axiom of development that all open world games should have. But obviously, I mean, a game like in the Fallout series, those can be far, you kind of step into a player-shaped hole. Who you are as a character, you just really define. And there's a lot of fun to be had with that. And there are a lot of open world games where the narrative focus is really on the big world mystery. How, there's some kind of big threat to the world, and that needs to be saved. Here, I think what we were focusing on was having a signature character, having that story, her story, be told in as compelling and sort of a more cinematic way. But we were trying to create a hybrid of the pleasures of action-adventure storytelling, as again, I was saying, like a signature character, cinematic storytelling, with some of the depth of lore and the choice-based dialogue that you have in an RPG. So trying to hit a kind of new sweet spot there, I think. And so that's what we carried forward.
That's great. So on the character of Aloy herself, I got a really interesting question here. I've been wondering this myself. How did you guys come up with the name Aloy? It's interesting. I mean, I immediately wanted to call her Alloy, and when I first saw it written out, does it involve kind of the metallic nature of kind of the machines, or?
It was a name that the character had, that had sort of arisen sort of naturally, I think, out of that early concepting phase where she was just this young woman gazing out across that sunlit valley. And I think that one of the reasons that it stuck wasn't that she was given that name. Like, the tribes of this world don't know what an alloy is, or an aloy is, or an alloy, rather, sorry. I get confused myself. But it did resonate with that idea of this being a world that combines these elements that are more traditional or tribal, and something that's also more technological.
Now, how do you think Aloy sees kind of the other characters that are around in the game of Horizon? Like, what is her relationship, do you think, to them?
Well, I think the central thing there is the fact that she grows up as an outcast. And I think that is one of the things that makes her really compelling to inhabit as a character. What it means is that she grew up as an outsider. So when she's encountering these tribes, even the one that cast her out, she doesn't share the superstitions of all these tribes. She has a much more kind of pragmatic worldview. And she's looking for real answers as to all of the questions that she has. But these things are often shrouded in some of the myth that the tribes have. The interesting thing about that, though, is that it's not as though she's just completely a skeptic. I think that she also understands that these stories may have glimmers of truth. There may be kernels of really valuable knowledge that are sort of in those stories. But what that also means is that, in terms of going back to your question about her relationship to others, she is somebody who's grown up as an outsider, and that means that she has a really profound inner conflict. When she's, let's say, interacting with members of this tribe, there's a part of her, I think, that wants to belong to that tribe, that wants to be accepted by that tribe. That would be a dream come true in a way. But in another way, she's so resentful and hostile of everything that was done to her, the injustice that was visited upon her by this tribe, that the last thing that she wants is to be someone who wants to belong to that tribe.
Interesting.
And I think that is an interesting conflict that pops up in pretty subtle ways throughout the entire game.
Yeah, kind of the, wanting to belong, kind of, but not wanting to belong, kind of. I could see that conflict kind of develop.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
I think that's core to who she is.
Yeah, and Corda, honestly, I think, everyone can relate to that on some level, right? So we're getting close on time. I did wanted to ask just a few more questions here. You've been hinting at this on a few areas, and I'm curious if you can share a little more. The role of spirituality amongst some of these different tribes. And, the world is such a different place in this vision of the distant future. So I'm curious about, kind of how spirituality and religion, even if you will, kind of feeds into this universe amongst the different tribes.
Sure. Well, it was a really big part of imagining the tribes. imagining not just their material culture, their architecture, but also their ceremonial culture and what they believe, what are the stories that they tell. And so I think our approach to that was seeing those stories as filling a really deep human need. You know, whether that's a way of inscribing the morality of that tribe, what the tribe believes in story, or helping to explain their understanding for things that are taking place in the world, including cataclysms that have happened much more recently. You know, there's a really big mix-up that takes place in the world about 20 years or so before you begin, and people are still struggling to make sense of that. They're sort of struggling to apply the mythologies of their tribes to understand that. So I think it was just part of that, was seeing it as being something that even if those myths didn't necessarily have literal truth, they had a kind of emotional or symbolic truth that sometimes points Aloy towards the answers that she's seeking.
What I love about a game with a great story, particularly like this, when it's layered, it's multifaceted, there's a lot going on, is it becomes this very interesting sort of lens at which to look through to sort of make sense out of the real world. I mean, in some cases, you're kind of almost reconstituting, I mean, in a very different way with robot dinosaurs and all these other things, but it's a way to sort of make sense out of the world that we're currently in. So was any of that in your head as you were kind of developing this narrative?
Well, I think there are different ways to approach a story, making a story, but one of the things that I guess I believe as a rule of thumb is that you don't want to start off with a message you're trying to tell. Because if you start off with that, if you start off with something that's like didactic or a lesson, then I think that's going to lead you in a direction that's preachy, and that also ends up being simplified because you're trying to prove a point. And then we didn't do that. Instead, we sort of started off with this big concept, and then we're just trying to figure out what is the most compelling story that we can tell through that. At the same time, of course, it does end up being something like every story, every great story anyways, is going to cast light on our lives, on our age. Every great story is in some way teaches us something about what it means to be human, right? I mean, that's what kind of, you know, makes them so compelling. So I think that it's in there, but I think that the thematic depth of the story that we were going for is stuff that's really open to interpretation. It's definitely, like I was saying, not like we figured out that we want everybody to walk away with this moral from the story or something like that. It was more like we just wanted to create something really rich and then let people think about what that meant to them.
That's great. That's great. So before I let you go, just one more for my own personal curiosity. You're very well versed in the open world genre and the narrative building. I think it's such a fascinating topic. I could go on like this all day, but I'm certain you're busy right now putting the final touches on the game, but I'm curious if you've had a chance to play any open world games that have been coming out in the last year or two, if there's any you thought were particularly great.
Well, I mean, obviously the last Metal Gear. I mean,
yes, of course.
And also, I mean, we've been playing these sort of in depth. I mean, also the latest Witcher was something that, and also the DLC. I mean, there's a lot of great work that's going on out there. It's definitely not. It's not like an easy field to come into. You got to really commit to go for broke to create something really special.
It's true. It's true. John Gonzalez, I'm so happy to have had you here to talk about Horizon Zero Dawn. I think this has been a ton of fun. I'm dying to play the game. It's out this February on PS4. PS4 Pro version, by the way, looking spectacular. Have you had a chance to check that out?
Yes. I mean, I think, yeah, it is really just taking the gorgeous and making it even more gorgeous.
Yeah,
you know,
it's sort of absurdly gorgeous now, yeah. And we have, if you guys haven't checked it out, we have a lot of PS4 Pros, and we have HDR TVs out there in 4K. Looks sensational. It's such a special way to experience the game. But I am dying to play Horizon Zero Dawn, and I'm so excited that we were able to have you here to really just give us a really, really deep look at what went into making the game. So
cool. I mean, it's really been a pleasure.
Absolutely.
I hope that the sort of the love that the team has for the project really comes across in a lot of those images and in things I've been saying, because it's really been an experience.
This is very special. And is this your first PlayStation experience?
It is.
Yeah. Yes. What do you think?
I gotta say, I've worked for independent studios, and I've done second, working for publishers, and this is the first time I've ever worked on first party. and I like first party.
There you go.
It's very nice.
That's great. John Gonzalez, thank you so much for joining us. We've got lots more to come here today, so stay with us, please. Thank you so much.
It's-
I've been looking forward to getting my hands on this since I saw it last year.
Oh, seeing this, I'm so excited right now.
I really like the art style.
I love that it's open world.
The details were amazing.
It's engrossing. The fact that you can see so far.
It's really nice to see like a strong female lead in a video game.
You can help, or you can get out of my way.
The gameplay was amazing.
You can play both stealth and kind of aggressive.
Being able to get out of the way, roll away, hit your target.
So fast-paced, it looks amazing. The level design, I think, is really cool. 3 of the Watchers came, they all swarmed and attacked me at once.
It was hard.
I'm sad that I have to leave.
It's a super interesting concept. Excited to play it again.
I've already pre-ordered, so I'm excited.
So whatever happens, I'm getting this game.
Pre-order and get weapon and armor modifications with the Nora Machine Trapper Pack.